Man, this video is gonna get censored hard. Finally, I get to do a video about great news for the gun community in my home state of Iowa. Welcome back to the channel, Den members. That's right, as you may or may not know, unless of course you live here in Iowa, in which case you definitely know. Let's be honest, not much of note happens in Iowa these days. At midterms, by a 65% majority, Iowans voted to adopt the right to keep and bear arms amendment to the Iowa State Constitution. This is essentially the same amendment as the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution, with a couple distinct differences to make it a little more comprehensive to the modern day. In other words, to keep people from twisting the words of our founding fathers and keep people from meddling in the rights of the people. When Iowa joined the Union in 1846, lawmakers really didn't see the need to add state-level protections to arms, guns, weapons into our state constitution because ownership was protected on the federal level by the Second Amendment. And they really didn't see that there would ever be a problem because it was explicitly outlined. We are finally fixing that mistake and joining 44 other states in the country that have adopted similar verbiage, leaving behind the states of California, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, and Maryland. Darn. Now, before I go on, if you, like those of us at the Phantom Llama's Den, think that the Second Amendment was absolutely clear when it stated, shall not be infringed, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel for future content. We've got a lot of awesome stuff coming. We don't want you to miss out. I think you're going to like some of the content we've got coming to the channel. Now, I don't like to dwell on politics on the channel, largely because it aggravates my already elevated blood pressure. Unfortunately, politics have invaded every vestige of our daily lives. Not least of all is gun ownership. I fully acknowledge that I am young, but for my whole life, I have seen guns and gun ownership and gun use under constant government attack in this country. But the brazen egregiousness, the gall, and the use of misinformation by government agencies, heads of government, and special interest groups to push anti-gun legislation, anti-gun sentiment, and the anti-gun agenda over the last 2 years has been mind-boggling. Really? Has it only been 2 years? My gosh, it's only been 2 years. It's almost like gun control advocates have forgotten that criminals really don't care about gun laws or gun restrictions. Frankly, I don't think politicians are that out to lunch. I actually think that they are hoping that the general public has completely forgotten how to think critically for themselves, assess a situation, and come to the truth of their own accord. I think that they're hoping that we accept their word, their judgment, as gospel. Call me a cynic, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I honestly think a lot of our elected politicians, our elected officials, are pushing gun control to slowly strip away our ability to defend our rights, to breed in us this idea of victimization, this ability that we cannot protect ourselves, that we must be reliant on the government for what we need. Because if you keep people reliant on the government, they will be loyal to the government, and that gives the government power. So many politicians only care about power and keeping power. Where have I heard that before? Those who have power are afraid to lose it. If you don't believe me, look at the United States and the world for that matter over the last 2 years. Look at the states that had the most draconic lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. Look then at the states that had the worst riots and worst destruction from peaceful protests. Now compare that to the list of cities and states that have adopted strict gun laws and banned certain types of weapons. That is not a coincidence. But the politicians don't want you to see it. They don't want you to ask the question. Heck, they've gone so far as to just completely ignore the issue and pretend it doesn't exist. If it gets out that this might be a problem, it starts to weaken their agenda and weaken their power over the people. You want to know what the real tragedy is, though? It's actually working. We have become so complicit and so content that we have learned to just accept that we are powerless in our own protection. That leads us to be victimized. We are self-made victims in this culture. If people don't understand that they can stand up and defend themselves in their own homes against an exterior threat, then we start to rely on the government. And when we rely on the government, we need them to start passing gun laws to make us feel safe, instead of actually taking on the responsibility of keeping ourselves safe. And there's that phrase again, I want to feel safe. So we put up no guns allowed signs. Newsflash, those don't work. When was the last time a criminal decided that he was going to go shoot somebody, but they saw a sign that said no guns allowed, so they went home sad that they couldn't use their firearm? They don't work. If a no guns allowed sign worked, guess what else would work? No murders allowed. When was the last time you saw a no murders allowed? Murder's illegal in this country. Still happens. Oh, there goes my blood pressure. All right. I promised this was going to be a positive video, and it is. With everything that I just said, it's no wonder why Iowa's passing of the right to keep and bear arms amendment is such a significant win. Now, many people see this as a symbolic victory, and it is, but if you look at what the amendment actually says, you'll see there's actually quite a bit more meat on the bones. So let's look at the verbiage of this amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. Before we dive into this together, I want to make it clear I am in no way a legal expert, but the amendment is written in plain English. We're going to break this into three parts. There are 3 sentences to this amendment, and each sentence outlines a very significant part of the amendment to keep and bear arms. First and foremost, it adopts the basic language of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is the verbiage that was used by our founding fathers when they chartered the Constitution, when they chartered the Bill of Rights for the United States of America. The right to keep and bear arms is absolute. It doesn't say, shall not be infringed, except in this. The next line of the amendment goes on to explain and further define the parameters as set forth by the first sentence. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Yes, thank you. In other words, Iowans, as free citizens in the free state of Iowa, sovereign state of Iowa, have a pre-existing fundamental right to keep and bear arms. That right is at the individual, the person-to-person level. A lot of gun control advocates will suggest that the Second Amendment really only applies to militia. That would be the state-run militaries or National Guards. The Founding Fathers wanted to make it explicitly clear, as long as government exists, there is always the chance that that government may become tyrannical. Why would people rely on a state-run military to protect them from a tyrannical state? Therefore, militia, being a military of the people, by the people, is required to ensure a free state. That's what is said in the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Iowa's amendment says the same thing that the Second Amendment to the Constitution says, just in modern plain English. But I'm sure they'll still try and find a way to twist that against gun rights someday. Now, the third sentence of the amendment is what has a lot of gun control advocates really upset. Any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. I wish that this had been included in the Second Amendment. I wish that we had this kind of verbiage back then. This clarifies and sets in no uncertain terms the extent of the right to keep and bear arms. Without doing a deep dive into the legalese of strict scrutiny, again, I am not a legal expert. Strict scrutiny is an extreme test of the highest magnitude that lawmakers and the courts have to go through to prove that something is not unconstitutional. Practically speaking, with the adoption of this amendment by the state of Iowa, it will be very difficult for any future legislation to be passed that would restrict or limit gun ownership or gun use or anything gun related in the state of Iowa. Additionally, this could impact pre-existing laws. Iowa is relatively free when it comes to gun rights. Honestly, the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head, and if you know anything different, please drop a comment in the comment section, but the only things that are restricted in Iowa are binary triggers. It's illegal to purchase or I even think own one in Iowa. Also, chemical or explosive ammunition. The round that comes to mind off the top of my head is Dragon's Breath. Personally, I'm really hoping that we can have those overturned because I'd love to get a binary trigger and I really want to get some Dragon's Breath on the channel. But again, now, like all state laws, they are preempted by federal laws. So this Iowa amendment doesn't make it legal for me to go and buy a fully automatic rifle without all the paperwork. I guess I could if I got my SOT. The ATF rules and the federal laws still supersede Iowa's law. However, it will make it very difficult for future state legislative action to limit or restrict anything gun related. So knock on wood, it'll be very unlikely for Iowa to ever pass a ban on things like AR-15 style rifles or standard capacity magazines. But this doesn't just apply to gun ownership. Again, keep and bear arms. Bear arms means carry arms. This applies to carrying guns. You have other states like New York making it almost impossible for you to carry a gun on you in public. With the adoption of this amendment, it's going to make it very difficult for future legislatures in the state of Iowa to pass a law that says you cannot carry here or there. The passage of this amendment is a huge win for Iowa. On the one hand, it's strengthening our rights against the people that would twist the words of the founding fathers to go against what they had intended and promote a more tyrannical government. On the other hand, the fact that it passed by nearly a 2/3 majority, a 65% majority, shows that the people of Iowa understand the importance of the Second Amendment, understood what the Second Amendment gave us. It's not about hunting, and Iowa is really big on hunting, but it's not about hunting. So stop asking how many deer are out there wearing Kevlar vests, Joe. You know, I'm trying to be a glass half full kind of guy right now, especially after the midterms. Iowa's done pretty well. We've made out pretty okay with the midterms, especially with the adoption of this amendment to keep and bear arms. I think we're going to see a trend towards more gun ownership across all classes, across all demographics. And as part of the gun community, that does make me happy. I'm praying that people in other states see what's happening in this country and start to understand that we have to maintain the Second Amendment as it was written, as it was intended by our founding fathers. Only with the protection of our right to keep and bear arms are all of our other rights protected. To anyone watching in states that have more restrictive gun laws than Iowa, I am sorry. Remember, like I said at the beginning of this video, you are not powerless. Do not be tricked into thinking that you are a victim and that you must rely on the government for help. I know it sounds cliche, but you can make a difference. Contact your elected officials. Make a noise. Be the squeaky wheel. It wasn't that long ago that Iowa was just considering becoming a stand-your-ground state for self-defense. Okay, I think that's enough for this video. I wanted to address this because, as I said at the beginning, this was a huge deal for Iowa, a huge win, both symbolically and practically speaking. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Iowa is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we have made great strides over the last number of years towards being a much more gun-friendly state, and I truly think that it shows in our culture. Again, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. I hope you were able to glean something off of this. Maybe you live in Iowa, but you didn't really understand all that the amendment entailed. If you live outside of Iowa, I hope this has inspired you to go out and start being an advocate for the gun community. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell icon to be alerted of future content. As always, make it a great day.